Hello and welcome back to Blue Planet here on Paladin Gaming. We are going to finish out reading the initial database. So we're starting with the Hammer of Light. The dark side of the Vasudan obsession with history was the emergence during the Great War of Hammer of Light, a cult that gained a strong following among the PVN, resulting in defections to the HOL cause. The HOL believed that the Shivans were the cosmic redeemers and destroyers predicted in obscure prophecies written thousands of years ago. Following the destruction of the Lucifer, the ideology and activities of Hammer of Light shifted. Today, the Hammer of Light remains active, but its military aims are long gone. Instead, Hammer of Light members act as a secretive undercurrent in Vasudan society, whispering dark warnings that the eternal, infinite will of the Shivans is still watching, ready to punish Terran and Vasudan transgressions alike. Hammer of Light ideology continues to paint the Shivans as a necessary and redemptive force in the cosmos, a vital force, yet the work of the Hammer of Light artisans glorifies the carnage of the Shivan apocalypse in a way many Terrans find disturbing. The Ones Who Dance in the Garden is an example of a Hammer of Light work that received considerable coverage in Terran politics. And with that, we're done with Vasudans, and we go to the Shivans. 50 years after the Great War, 18 years after the Second Incursion, we still know almost nothing about the Shivans. Physically, the Shivans have multiple compound eyes and 5 legs with claw-like manipulators. Their insect-like carapace does not appear original to the creature's physiognomy, suggesting the Shivans are a cybernetic fusion of biology and technology. The integrated plasma weapon also exhibits properties of an organic artificial fusion. The weapon may be a kind of focusing device powered by the energy of the being itself, though this point is the subject of heated controversy. These details are cited as evidence that the Shivans could not have evolved as the Terran or Vasudan species had, but that they were likely constructed by another entity. Only a handful of Shivans have ever been captured, and all research on live specimens ended with the GTI's Hades Rebellion in 2335. The results of these studies remain highly classified. Though the Shivans are obviously xenocidal, their motives and origins have yet to be determined. According to ancient artifacts, the Shivans seem to possess some kind of sensitivity to subspace disturbances. We do not know if the Shivans returned to this corner of the galaxy by chance, by cycle or pattern, or by their detection of Terran Vasudan subspace travel. Xenobiologists know very little about Shivan society. A leading hypothesis is the hive mind theory, arguing that Shivan society is broken down into specialized functions driven by collective intelligence. The most convincing evidence supporting this theory is the behavior of the Shivan forces following the destruction of the Lucifer, the turning point of the Great War. Other experts caution against attributing insectoid properties to the Shivans, regardless of their appearance and behavior. The NTF ETAC project confirmed that Shivan communications occurs in modulated quantum pulses, exhibiting some non-local and possibly even acausative properties. Whether ETAC simply drew the attention of the Shivans or actually enabled communication with them remains hotly disputed. The nature of Shivan language, if it can be called such, suggests that their cognition may be so alien as to render communications or even common thoughts effectively impossible. Ancient legends suggested that the Shivans were born from the flux of subspace, intended by the universe to eradicate aggressively hegemonistic species and preserve diversity. The Shivans do not appear to live in subspace, but other elements of the ancient legend are currently untested. In conclusion, the lessons of Capella must be restated. The Shivans are an incredibly powerful, sophisticated species, exhibiting incredible diversity in their technological prowess. No Shivan shipyards have ever been sighted, nor any Shivan population center, suggesting that the species as a whole may be nomadic and spaceborne. How the Shivans manufacture new vessels remains unknown. Again, not acknowledging Scroll of Azam-Karzim, which came later. The Shivans have exhibited the capacity to engineer subspace and destroy stars. The purpose of this action is unknown. Some have suggested that they may be creating nebulae, which may be their preferred habitat. Others have suggested that the Shivans are creating supernodes that link portions of their space or even link our universe with others. Whatever the true answer is, it is currently believed that Shivan species may occupy most or all of the Milky Way galaxy. They may even extend beyond. Further contact with the species is almost a certainty, but their capabilities and objectives remain completely unknown. and now the Ancients. During the Great War, as the annihilation of Earth seemed imminent, Vasudan scientists discovered the ruins of an extinct civilization we now call the Ancients. Data excavated at the site enabled the Allies to track and destroy the SD Lucifer in subspace. After the Great War, scientists uncovered more sites throughout Terran Vasudan space. Though only fragments remain, this interstellar society thrived thousands of years ago. Their empire was more expansive than the current boundaries of known space, and archaeologists believe they might eventually uncover a map of the ancient nodes, enabling the Alliance to travel to systems previously uncharted. There's virtually no visual record of this civilization except hieroglyphic forms discovered at the archaeological sites and a handful of technological schematics. Major excavations are underway in Altair, Aldebaran, and Deneb, but the data gathered there remains classified at the highest level. Terran archaeologists use a Minoan naming convention to identify sites and major artifacts. Current evidence suggests that the Shivans exterminated this civilization over 8,000 years ago. The ancients believed the Shivans were a race of cosmic destroyers, and that the extinction of their species was an act of retribution for striving beyond their ordained place in the cosmic order. Recent archaeological findings seem to be artifacts of a species annihilated by the ancients between 8 and 10,000 years ago. Subspace. In simple terms, subspace is an in-dimensional tunnel between one point in the universe and another. A vessel can travel through this tunnel in a matter of minutes, making a journey that might otherwise take decades or even centuries at light speed. A jump drive causes the ship to vibrate in multiple dimensions until its modulations are in perfect synchronization with the subspace continuum. A vortex opens, creating an aperture from an infinitesimally small point in the cosmos, enabling the vessel to cross the subspace threshold. Two types of jumps are possible. First, an intra-system jump can occur between 2 points in a star system. Most small spacefaring vessels are equipped with motivators capable of these short jumps. The presence of an intense gravitational field is required, prohibiting travel beyond the boundaries of a star system. Second, ships can jump from system to system via nodes. Until the Great War, only larger ships could generate sufficient power to use jump nodes. The development of jump drives for fighters and bombers in 2335 enabled the Alliance to destroy the SD Lucifer in subspace. Producing these small jump drives is prohibitively expensive, so they are restricted to missions that require pilots to travel between systems. The head-up display indicates the location of jump nodes with a green sphere. The vast majority of subspace nodes are extremely unstable, forming and dissipating in nanoseconds. Other nodes have a longer lifespan, existing for centuries or millennia before collapsing. The jump nodes sanctioned by the GTVA for interstellar travel are expected to remain stable for many years. Shivan vessels have exhibited the ability to traverse unstable nodes. This capability was put to extensive use during the Great War. The GTVA maintains a continuous watch for the formation of new unstable nodes in Vega in case the Shivans attempt transit from Capella. The tactical details of inter-system jumps are of vital importance to modern space warfare. A warship's subspace drive must take time to recharge between jumps. Additionally, a jump solution must be calculated, a process which may take considerable time depending on the precise precision of the departure and destination coordinates, the presence of massive objects along the jump path, and even the unpredictable nature of subspace itself. The Rift 1. The 18 years that followed the Capella supernova were not kind to Terran Vasudan relations. The reasons for this were as much psychological as political. As the post-Capella economic collapse accelerated, secessionist movements and brush wars sprang up in outlying GTVA systems. Following the pattern established by Marcus Glave's GTI insurgency and Bosch's Neo-Terran Front, these conflicts disproportionately targeted Vasudans as symbols and perpetrators of humankind's economic and ideological disintegration. The reasons were not complex. Fringe demagogues and the seditious militia leaders saw the Vasudans as an easy way to unite disaffected Terrans. Alliance citizens were often initially unwilling to revolt against their own government, but found it easier to accept passive resistance or armed uprising when their hostility was steered towards the Vasudan elements of the GTVA. The GTVA response to these brush wars was initially coherent and coordinated. However, the Vasudophobic nature of the conflicts presented new challenges. Terran elements of the GTVA fleet had suffered more casualties than their Vasudan counterparts during the Shivan incursion, despite extensive Vasudan operations in the Nebular Theater. Moreover, the Vasudan Battlegroup organizational scheme was more flexible and versatile than the Terran fleet model. This meant that, in many cases, GTVA High Command deployed Vasudan warships to take up patrol and intervention roles that would normally have been filled by Terran ships and crews. perceived Vasudan meddling in border conflicts only deepened Terran fears of the economically prosperous and militarily intact Vasudans, exacerbating growing ideological rifts and prejudices. Meanwhile, Khonsu II's willingness to put Vasudan ships and aid workers in harm's way in missions to stamp out Terran brushfires led to some degree of discontent among the Vasudan technocrats and politicians of the General Assembly. This tension inevitably began to contaminate relations within the General Assembly, even between Terrans and Vasudans who had once been friends and political partners. By 2370, these political effects were boiling over. Vasudan warships on peacekeeping missions were frequently targeted for attack, and in at least one incident, a clever separatist ploy led a Terran corvette to assault a Vasudan cruiser in defense of what the Terran captain believed to be an innocent refugee convoy. Meanwhile, Terran politicians continued to bicker over the terms of Vasudan aid in post-Capellan reconstruction, unwilling to either accept too much Vasudan aid for fear of angering anti-Vasudan constituents, or too little simply because Vasudan aid was necessary and vital. Admiral Petrarch's drive to devote funding to the return to Sol rather than to reconstruction efforts frustrated Khonsu II, who accused the Admiral of looking to the past instead of to the stars for answers. In return, Petrarch, once a staunch advocate of Terran-Vasudan military integration, accused the Emperor of petty jealousy over the prospect of Terrans regaining their homeworld, where the Vasudans never could. Khonsu handled the personal affront better than most Vasudans might have, but the damage was done. Damn it, Petrarch. The Rift II. Within the next 2 years, it became apparent that Terran-Vasudan relations were decaying. Political chill crept into the military, and officer exchange programs tapered off. In the Capellan era, the GTVA had been on the verge of becoming a truly integrated society. The frog calls of Vasudan intercom chatter were becoming a welcome sound on Terran destroyers, and Vasudan society in general had become a sharp turn away from ritualized formulaic protocols and towards a more Terran model. These social changes reversed themselves with startling rapidity, born out of growing Terran pessimism and the ironically reversed Vasudan perception that the Terrans had become backwards-looking, superstitious, and hidebound. On the Vasudan side, animosity towards Terrans grew as they continued to devote resources to their return to Sol. The prosperous cosmopolitan Vasudans of the post-Capella era looked down on the Terran fixation with their homeworld and resented continued Terran xenophobia towards the Vasudans. In Vasudan eyes, the Terrans were petulant, tribal, fractious, immature, overly focused on a return to their planetary womb, and devoid of the kind of racial pride that the Vasudans felt towards their emperor. While Vasudan contractors continued to build warships for the Terrans, and Vasudan engineers and tacticians worked closely with Terran friends on the design of a new generation of warships and weapons to counter the Shivan threat, the GTVA military began to segregate. Khonsu II reinstated the Medjai, a close-knit band of military leaders and admirals who reported directly to him. The Medjai began an ambitious restructuring of the Vasudan military in order to create a totally self-sufficient and powerful force capable of power projection, sustained counterinsurgency operations, and node denial. The Terrans, who were still struggling to get their own new warship program off the ground in the face of massive debt, were not pleased to see themselves so thoroughly eclipsed. Terran elements of the General Assembly accused Khonsu II of playing this move even before Capella, citing the Vasudan insistence on developing and deploying their own Setak AWACS instead of adopting the superior Terran Charybdis. Joint Terran-Vasudan military exercises continued in a cursory fashion for the next several years, but only in the form of planned responses to Shivan incursion. No counterinsurgency operations in either Terran or Vasudan space were gamed out. Officer exchange programs did not resume simply because the political will for such a reconciliation did not exist. The Vasudans had found their place amongst the stars, and the Terrans were busy trying to go home. 3 left. Vasudan Mysticism I. While relations between the two species deteriorated, Khonsu II was taking counsel with a new power within the Vasudan court. The demonstration of massive Shivan power that was Capella triggered a resurgence of the dormant Hammer of Light ideology in a number of variably militant and virulent forms. Khonsu II moved to discourage this type of thought, seeing it in an echo of the Terran ideological collapse. During this ideological normalization, he encountered a very unusual new figure, the Jester Nabirasul. The Vasudan species has always taken a different attitude toward mysticism than the Terrans. Vasudan society had, from its earliest days, failed to make a significant distinction between science and religion, not because religion was allowed to dictate scientific findings, but the reverse. Mysticism was simply viewed as a less precise tool for measuring the cosmos, one that blended neatly into science as new discoveries were made. Terrans often found and continue to find this aspect of Vasudan society difficult to understand. In Terran circles, science was viewed as a useful, rigorous, hard way to achieve answers and results, whereas mysticism, including the belief in ascended life or energy beings, was simply a form of self-deception combined with coincidence. Vasudan society, however, was built on myths of a powerful ancient race that had visited and touched their homeworld ages ago, myths that were largely substantiated by the discovery of the ancient civilization. To the Vasudans, the existence of higher powers in the universe had always been a given, and the belief that communication with them might be possible was seen as reasonable rather than mad. The Vasudans did not believe that any sufficiently advanced technology was indistinguishable from magic. They believed that magic had always been sufficiently advanced technology. Vasudan Mysticism II. A central part of Vasudan culture was the value of bloodlines. The Vasudan worldview included a non-linear perception of time with moral and social implications. A Vasudan believed that she existed in the same overall space-time as her own ancestors and descendants, and therefore her actions would be judged both by her forefathers and her progeny. This lent both an air of fatalism and a willingness to heed prophecy to Vasudan culture, as it was often credited as a contribution to the Vasudan talent and analytical foresight. The great Vasudan successes in economic and cultural fields were often based on the ability to deprecate their near-future gain in favor of long-term planning. Even the tragic loss of Vasuda Prime was cushioned by the belief that distant ancestors remained a living part of Vasudan culture. No Vasudan mastered the union between the mystical and the secular more completely than Khonsu II. The Emperor took divination and mysticism into consultation as he planned the movements of battle groups and the regulation of his prosperous economy. Terran scientists flocked to observe this phenomenon and concluded that Vasudan prophecy was in fact startlingly reliable, perhaps an inbuilt powerful form of analysis and intuition capable of ingesting and synthesizing vast amounts of data in order to determine trends. The Vasudans, however, stubbornly maintained that prophetic abilities amongst their species, including those once claimed by the Hammer of Light, were in fact the result of communion with powerful alien beings. The term supernatural is never used in Vasudan mythology. The Vasudan view is that anything which occurs is natural and scientific. As Khonsu reigned in the briefly renaissant Hammer of Light sects, an extraordinary new prophet came to his attention. The so-called Jester Nabirasul, a military analyst and former warship commander, veteran of the Nebular campaign, completely unaffiliated with the Hammer of Light, claimed to have achieved a vague sense of communion with the Shivans, foreseen the destruction of Capella, and understood its dread purpose. Khonsu took this claim seriously and immediately drew the Jester into his confidence. The reason for this apparently startling move can be traced back to a GTI project unearthed after the failed Hades rebellion, Project Nagari. Our final for the initial tranche, Project Nagari I. As the Great War careened towards its momentous conclusion, elements of galactic Terran intelligence found themselves with a difficult question to answer. As if the Hammer of Light fanatics were not enough, some members of the GTA military began to report feelings of non-specific, fear-inducing emotional contact with Shivan forces. The first report was based on analysis of flight data recordings from the massacre at Riviera Station. Lieutenant Ash, the last survivor of Terran Patrol Wing Gamma 39er, claimed to feel Shivan forces following him. This was initially attributed to post-traumatic shock from the Shivan encounter, but the GTI scout wings had been following Shivan movements for weeks prior to the Riviera attack, and other pilots began to report similar sensations of non-specific mental contact. After the McCarthy defection, post-trial interrogation of McCarthy by GTI operatives suggested that he too had become convinced of the Shivan threat after communication with a Vasudan captive who relayed the Hammer Light ideology and stories of transcendent contact with the Shivans by meditating Vasudans. The Vasudan captive did not attribute this communication to any supernatural force, but to some form of detectable communication in use by the Shivans. Project Nagari was initiated to isolate this means of communication, determine which humans were sensitive to it and why, and attempt to create a countermeasure or even a form of communication. Project Nagari was only entering its initial stages when the Hades rebellion came crashing down, but its conclusions fell into the hands of the Vasudans, and Khonsu II read its initial postulates regarding quantum pulse transmission and Shivan behavior with great interest. When the Jester stepped forward in the wake of the Capella massacre as another example of such sensitivity, Khonsu had already prepared contingency plans to verify the trustworthiness of such a prophet. Although the Nagari research was incomplete and uncertain, initial testing suggested that Nabirasul possessed the profile of a possible peace-sensitive individual. Alright, that is our intelligence briefings. So this has been the third part of the database for Blue Planet Complete here on Freespace 2, for Freespace 2 here on Paladin Gaming. We will do more database bonus content as more database entries are unlocked with gameplay. This is Paladin Gaming, signing off.